This episode is being brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful, user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, visit the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Welcome to episode 60, just in time for American Businesswomen's Day. We have two amazing women in the clinical trial space this week. Andrea Valenti spent the last 20 plus years building global clinical trial tech organizations and technologies. Recently, she was named CEO of ClinOne, a company that offers a virtual clinical trial platform for patients. We also have Jennifer Peters, who started out having an idea to streamline payments between clinical trial sponsors and investigators, therefore went on to co-found Greenfire in 2008, which was later acquired for $1.1 billion in 2021. She's also the board chair of ClinOne. This is a very dense episode. We cover a lot of topics. We discuss the relationship between patients and sites, the role of protocol design on participant engagement, the technology adoption cycle, empowering patients by empowering sites, platforms versus interoperability, and in the spirit of American Businesswomen's Day, the value of more women in leadership roles in clinical research. So without further ado, Andrea Valenti and Jennifer Peters. All right, guys, today on the podcast, we have a rare 2-for-1, always fun. So Andrea Valenti, Jennifer Peters, welcome you guys. I appreciate you coming on as we worked through some technical difficulties to get you guys.
Glad to be here, Brad. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to, jump right out of the gate here with a normal question. I always love to hear about people's backgrounds and sort of what brought them to clinical research. It's always rarely people sort of set out to work in the clinical trial space, I find. So it's sometimes sort of instructive and fun to hear about, how people got here. So Andrea, why don't you start us off and just tell us a little bit about your clinical research backstory, if you will.
Sure. So I started in the clinical research, clinical technology space quite a while ago with the advent of EDC. I was actually in the IT space for a while and got a call to join a little company called Phase Forward back in the day and was one of the early team members of that company. And spent my career there starting on the service delivery side and then moved over to the commercial side and then eventually left there and went back there, believe it or not. And I always felt, interestingly, that they were solving such a compelling business problem and frankly, human problem around helping collect data for clinical trials to prove that drugs were going to be efficacious and safe for people, and being able to do that in an effective and efficient way. And so then, after I left there, I ended up going and joining a company called PHT in the ECOA space. So moved from the EDC side to the ECOA side, and was very fortunate to be able to spend some time there getting to learn how product gets developed. So I became chief operating officer there after some time. And then we were acquired by ERT. And so I was the chief development officer at ERT, responsible for all of the global technology development for ERT. Spent 5 years there. And then got a chance to work for a company called Medable. And Medable was a really interesting experience because obviously that's the advent of decentralized clinical trials. And actually just prior to Medable, I went back to Oracle. And this is something I was really excited about. I helped build their pandemic response systems for COVID-19 and worked with the government to help with Operation Warp Speed and being able to build basically the platform to support the data collection around the clinical trials for COVID-19, collect the real world evidence, and then eventually supply and deliver drug through the government. So that was a really interesting experience and got to do that not only on a domestic level, but globally, and had a chance to partner with the Tony Blair Institute of Global Change and work with developing countries in helping them roll out mostly other kinds of drugs because COVID drug wasn't available to developing countries just yet. But we built the platform to be ubiquitous, and it was really heartening to help public health around these developing countries. So then after that, I went to Medable and then got a call to join this little company called ClinOne. And really coming to ClinOne to me has been a really exciting opportunity to serve the patient and the site in this journey we know as clinical trials. And, I think we're on the sort of start of how we're going to evolve serving patients in a very different way and how sites engage in a different way. And I'm excited to talk about that. I'd say the underlying sort of subtext to this is my husband had a very complex medical history. He was a dialysis patient. He was a cancer survivor. He went through sepsis twice, and he was in a clinical trial when he had a kidney transplant. So I've had the opportunity to see how healthcare gets delivered in a very comprehensive way, but also through the clinical trial. So as a caregiver, I've had that direct experience, and it always has brought me back to this space. And that certainly has been a draw for me on a personal level.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's always really kind of surprising to hear, I think, how people's lives are touched by clinical trials and sort of draws them into that space. I mean, I love that because I do think you have, or at least have the ability to have a unique perspective because, there's a lot of people in the field who maybe never taken part in a trial or maybe even never even seen, what really happens on the ground. So I think that's an amazing perspective to have. And really, there's a lot of stuff I want to dive into on what you said there. But, I want to move on here and let Jennifer have an opportunity to introduce herself. So, Jennifer, let's hear your origin story.
Oh, gosh, this is a tough act to follow. This is the downside of going second. I started like you've mentioned, like many people, obviously not with the intention of going into clinical research. So it was just happenstance. So after grad school, I was in New York living and working in sales type position and was there for 9/11. And after 9/11, it changed changed everything, but it changed life in a very dramatic way. And, I was in search of a new position, and I went and found a little company at the time that was called TransPerfect, which was a translation company. And, within 3 months had moved to a new city and taken on a new role in business development, and also was given the opportunity to help establish their life sciences practice group. Knew nothing about clinical trials and really did a lot of learning through documentation, through the very rote and sometimes boring, reviewing ICFs and then understanding the complexities of consenting patients and protocols, and then obviously the nuances in getting those translated, and then really started to understand how trials were run. Through that, I spent over a decade there, was a wonderful entrepreneurial training ground. And, I think through some of my experiences there was inspired to co-found a company called Greenfire with 2 other co-founders. And again, we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. So, we went in and we were met with a lot of the pessimism, I would say, that still pervades our industry today with regard to the introduction of new technologies. And so this idea of automating patient payments and making it less burdensome for them was met with, I still remember our first conference, it was met with a lot of, that's never going to work. No one's ever going to buy it. This isn't a pain. You should just give up now because pharma's not going to change. Well, turns out they were wrong. And eventually there was adoption, but it wasn't overnight. We started in 2008. It was obviously, site by site, university by university. We started, our first sale was actually to a sponsor, but we quickly, I think one of the things I'm most proud of there is that we quickly realized that this company and this technology, and I think I would go so far as to say any technology, is not going to be adopted without the site's active endorsement and participation. And I think that it is a large part of why Greenfire was able to be as successful as it is today, was keeping the sites actively engaged and in mind when building the technology, delivering and partnering. So that was a fun experience, stressful but fun. And then eventually, through that company development grew up, I would say, right? In terms of having the understanding of how important interoperability is. It wasn't as in vogue, in 2000, 10 years ago. This idea of, at that point, the popular goal was platform, a one-stop shop. Everyone, wants to have just one, and we still talk about that today. But we really focused on best in class, on wanting to do one thing really, really well, but also understanding that there is a responsibility, I think, that also comes with that, and being able to partner, with other technologies. And then after that, I spent some time at what is now called Signan, which was formerly Bracket, in their ePro and neuroscience business. And that was, again, another amazing experience, completely different than what I had known before, and a different challenge, dealing with technologies that were older. There had been a lot of M&A activity, so there was, some complexity in that. And it wasn't something that necessarily had been constructed one time from the ground up that we knew, intimately. So that was, very rewarding experience, being able to also see how different clinical technologies impacted the patient. And, similar, which is interesting because Andrea and I haven't necessarily talked about this before, but similar to Andrea, one of my very dearest friends who I would, consider a brother growing up, was diagnosed with ALS in 2017, and he was 35 years old. And I left. Part of the reason I transitioned out of Bracket was to become one of his caregivers. And his wife and, my husband and I all partnered together to try to go through this journey. And we got him into a trial, and unfortunately, he passed away this year. And we still don't know if he actually received placebo or not. And so this is like certainly watching from an intimate patient perspective and caregiver perspective. I think, to your point, Brad, it absolutely changes, I think, the way that you see and approach all of these technologies. Are businesses, sites are businesses, but it does give you a different appreciation for the patient experience in a way that isn't just because it happens to be the latest buzzword of our industry. Likes to have a lot of buzzwords. So, we had patient centricity, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And now, then it became convenience, and, now we've moved on. So that's a little bit.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to me that there is oftentimes such a disconnect between the sites who they're seeing these patients every day, right? They're very intimately attuned, to what's going on. And like something is, I don't want to say simple because it's not simple, as you point out, that like not knowing, even after participation, if somebody had a placebo or an active drug, that's one thing, but that's kind of stuff is ubiquitous throughout, how clinical trials operate. It's chaos in a lot of ways, at the site level, and certainly between sites and sponsors and vendors and all the different people involved. So I love that people are coming in who at least have had, the experience and ability to see that, because so many people come in and are like, we're going to fix clinical trials. I'm like, well, you don't even know what's wrong with them. There's a laundry list, but for better or worse, having had that experience is huge in terms of actually understanding the real underlying problems. I noticed you guys both mentioned sites, in your sort of introductions there. And I think that's a, super, again, still underappreciated aspect is understanding, and I don't want to say leveraging, but getting the support of sites, to help these things move forward. So I kind of want to wrap this all into, ClinOne. So how would you characterize, ClinOne? It seems to fit sort of in what I generally call the DCT space. And is that accurate? And if so, how is ClinOne different than some of the other sort of DCT vendors out there?
It's a great question, and thank you for that. The way we think about it is there's several ecosystems involved in how a clinical trial gets run. Let's call this particular work stream or strata the human ecosystem. And we really feel very strongly that the site, the participant, and the sponsor who create this ecosystem have a role. And from a site and a participant perspective, and when I talk about participant, I'm talking extended caregivers, family members, translators. There could be any number of participants supporting that main patient need to go through a journey. And that journey needs to be delivered in a way that works for them. And that site has particular ways of the way they do work. And they want to care for the patient effectively. And they want to do it around a workflow or a process that's going to enable them to be effective. And likewise, the patient, when they participate, they have a life to live. They're volunteering essentially as a participant in a clinical trial. Sometimes I think that's forgotten. Surely there are certain participants who go for a last opportunity for care, but for the most part, people are in it for the greater good. And in order for them to incorporate that into their lives effectively, there needs to be a level of choice and adaptivity for them to participate. And what we do in our charter as the ClinOne company and platform is to offer that level of choice throughout the journey. And that's for the site and that's for the participant. And then do it in a way, as Jennifer described, in a best of breed fashion. And we think being able to partner with other organizations through interoperability, through process, through technology, and deliver that in a way that is, I hate the word seamless because it's so overused, but do it in a way that reduces burden, provides a level of continuity that someone can have just less friction in how they participate. And that's really our main charter. We do that on our platform. We do that in a way that's easy to configure, deliver. And we really take the time, and I think this is truly important, and I'll talk about this later because I think this would be of interest to the audience, that we want to listen. That's the first thing we want to do, is listen to our sites and our patients around how we deliver these capabilities, and then be able to tailor them based on those needs. So that's really what it's all about. And then finally, take data and look at data and say, okay, we see things that are patterning, that are changing. How do we adapt to that so that that experience is better for that person, for that site, and be able to be flexible enough on the platform to do that effectively? So that's really what we're all about.
Yeah, I love that. I think something that often goes maybe again underappreciated is that sites and patients are partners in this to a lot more of a degree than people realize. There may be this misunderstanding out there that patients want it one way, but sites want it another way. And I think that's not true at all because frankly, you'd be surprised at the depths that sites go to keep their patients engaged and try to make their lives easy, even when protocols are designed in a way that makes it very complex and difficult. We build intense relationships oftentimes, with our participants and, try to do everything we can to make their lives easy as well. So, I've always in a lot of ways considered us kind of in the same boat. And so, I love that you're sort of addressing both sides because I think there should be more sort of focus on that partnership between site and patient. The patient doesn't want to come see you if you're a site. And because frankly, what we put them through is sometimes just laughable. They're going to spend 3 hours on site. They got to travel across town. They got to find childcare. They got to take a day off work. We're asking them to do all these things. And sites don't want them to have to do that, once every 2 weeks. That's insane. Interestingly, and I think again, sort of what goes unnoticed, I think a good solution for patients is also a good solution for sites too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, for whatever reason, I haven't seen that brought up as much as you would think when, again, it's kind of intuitive if you work at the site level, right?
Well, there's all kinds of considerations, and to be able to provide that level of adaptivity and choice, I think, is really important. I mean, you brought up, sort of a quality of life social determinant issue associated with childcare. Often patients don't have car access, for example, or transportation access. And being able to give them that flexibility to engage with transportation and allow for that to happen easily and seamlessly. And oh, by the way, allow the site to be able to coordinate it easily and seamlessly, I think is so critical.
Right.
And you can think and imagine of many aspects of how a site and a patient have to work together to make that happen. I sort of take it right back to my personal experience because I've spent a lot of time in the Boston medical community on a personal level. And I can vouch for the fact that you just described around having a relationship with your site staff and physician staff. So much to the point where they looked at me and said, "Are you a physician?" I said, "No, I've just had a lot of experience on both sides." But they absolutely viewed it as a partnership. It was all about how we can make this work together versus, we're going to dictate to you how this is going to happen.
Do you think that that's a result of like site dynamics or more of a result of protocol design? Right. I mean, it's sort of interesting. Like I've talked to other sites who are like, we did a trial for patients with lower limb amputations. Well, as you would guess, a lot of them can't drive. Mm-hmm. So, we would set up and, get rides there. And other sites would ask us, like, how are you getting your patients in? I'm like, well, we're getting them, medical transport. Well, we can't do that because we're part of a big institution. And, we got to go through contracting and all this legal stuff. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Is it, could that be something that could be written into a protocol or provided that could do away with the issue? Or I guess, again, sort of like chicken or egg, right? Like, is it the protocol or is it sort of how sites operate that are sometimes creating these issues?
Yeah, I think it's a combination for sure. So we've actually worked on a protocol in particular that it was an epilepsy protocol. Patients were not allowed to drive. So in this case, the sponsor designed the study effectively to support patient transportation to the site. On the other hand, we work directly with site networks. And, some of them have more institutional view around this. And so, do they have to have multiple providers? Do they have to, sort of consider different things, which complicates the issue and maybe actually gets in the way of trying to actually serve the patient. So to the degree that we can remove that barrier, I think is important. I do think that there's opportunity to think about how the protocol is designed in a much more multifaceted way. Certainly efficacy and safety are important, and ultimately endpoints actually are what get a drug approved. But you can't do it without patients. And so you have to retain patients in a study in order to get the data to prove effectively. And patients really need to be able to participate in a full way. And if we think about designing the protocol, maybe with some of those factors in mind, in addition to the primary reasons, we could affect the outcome in terms of how the study conduct happens. And that also actually helps the site out in a lot of ways. And so that's what we're thinking about. Here's the opportunity to look at behavioral data to be able to say in a protocol, hey, maybe you should be thinking about this kind of cohort of patient in a particular way. And then being able to allow the site to manage it based on the way they think is best.
Right. So building that sort of ability to, adapt or, I guess optionality, one of the more, words I don't love to use, but I get it. It gets the point across. Like building that into protocols on the front end versus having a traditional protocol and then sort of slapping, post hoc, these different technology solutions, quote unquote, on top of them. So I think, and that's sort of where my question I think was going, was like, do we need in a world where we want to move towards DCT and patient/site optionality, do we need to really be more thoughtful in how these protocols are designed? I mean, is it just going to be a new world of protocol design?
I mean, my opinion is I think that's certainly one dimension. I also think that there's an opportunity to better understand how the patient engages in a deeper way and be able to offer that optionality in an adaptive way, almost like an adaptive clinical trial. Make sure that as the patient changes their behavior or moves through the trial or needs to engage in a different way, those options are available for them.
Yeah, am I wrong that like adaptive clinical trials there was some like momentum in that direction for a while, but it sort of fell away. I mean, is there a good reason for that, or am I wrong? Maybe is it something that's seeing some momentum again?
Well, no, I think there's a distinction. There's adaptive clinical trials around the clinical endpoints and being able to look at the science and adapt the science based upon the results that they're getting. I almost want to take that same paradigm and apply it to how patients in site engage. How can you learn from the behavior and adapt that capability so that it works for the patient and for the site based on where they are? So if the site, for example, has to use paper for whatever reason, and there could be a reason in the consent process, we're actually going to put a white paper out soon where we've interviewed a bunch of site staff about where their pain points are. And in one particular case, one of the coordinators said, we must take paper because our EHR requires us to take paper. And, we have to upload it into the EHR system. And the ClinOne platform allows for that. We say, we're agnostic. You can do consent through or you can do the consent through wet ink. It doesn't matter to us. It can be digitized so long as it's in the same place. And you have the ability to be able to recall that information. How you deliver it to us, it's up to you. Doesn't matter. So that's just one example of what we think is important to offer.
Yeah, well, and again, even that is refreshing in the world that we live in now where sites don't have a lot of choice in the matter necessarily. And I've heard this, and maybe it's something you can shed some light on, but the sort of growing pains we're seeing in the DCT space are not dissimilar from when EDC was really sort of coming into its own. I mean, did you say that's a pretty fair comparison?
I think it's an absolutely fair comparison. And it's the cyclical technology adoption cycle, right? You have the refreshed and, throes of excitement and, then to the trough of disappointment. And then you move out of that to the acceptance of where it is from a reality perspective. I think we're a little in that trough of disappointment right now. That doesn't mean technology's bad. That doesn't mean it's not the way we should be going. I just think that organizations in our space take time. They take time to adopt. They take time to adapt. And I think some of the technology providers out there are trying to push the envelope without a level of understanding and nuance of our space, and being able to really sit, listen, and hear what the challenges truly are, and driving a mission. And I love that the envelope is being pushed, and at the same time, there's a level of pragmatism that has to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel very torn because I'm like, I want to see progress and I want to see things get better, for what we do, because I've seen patients' lives be changed and quality of life increase dramatically, but then I've also seen patients, because of protocol designs and too many barriers, be barred from being able to do that. So it's very visceral and real at the site level, but at the same time, it's hard to tell who's sort of full of crap, for lack of a better word, and who, knows what they're talking about. I mean, and maybe, it's funny because, in Jennifer's example, like I love Greenfire, I know those guys pretty well, and what they provide makes a ton of sense for both sites and patients. I mean, it's a great solution, but if you were being sort of like shouted down, early, it makes it hard to discern what's going to come out as legitimate and what's just smoke, you know what I mean? And we're in a very smoky period right now, it feels like.
Yeah. When I first was introduced to ClinOne, it was in 2020. And what really, I would say, attracted me to get involved with this business was that even in the throes of COVID, that there was still a fundamental understanding that our focus must be on the patient, and data is king, right? So we all know at the end of the day, the sponsor wants data. Protocols are constructed in order to get that data. To make sure that we were being mindful of how sites were going to interact with technology, even at that point, for me, it was different. 2020 and COVID had given a really nice tailwind to a DCT. I think that's when there was a lot of conversation about how, because it was obviously, in many instances, it was self-serving. We don't need sites anymore. We can just deliver all of this, all of this, and this is the wave of the future. And it was a very good story that was told. And it was told to really smart investors. And it was told right at every conference, and decentralized trials became this new thing that everyone was talking about. And the truth is that decentralized trials had been, pieces of that had already existed. This was just a new label that we were slapping on it in order to embrace this tailwind, we'll say. I think the ClinOne story for me was powerful because the idea was not only can we engage a patient, but can we actually empower the patient? And by empowering the patient, we need to have the site as our partner, and we need to be able to empower the site. And certainly DCT is not going anywhere. This is, absolutely, we should be able to break down barriers for patients and give them access. But to Andrea's point, the idea that choice is really what we're after. And we're after being able to meet the patient and site where they are and be able to work with other technologies. And that approach is, who knows what will happen. But I think this idea of interoperability, we've gone through the platform phase, and we certainly will go through that again because it's a cycle. But I think there's really something, if you're truly interested in and understand that the patient experience and engagement is what is going to deliver the most amount of data, and you can tie those together more closely, you know that you need these technologies, but you also need to be able to choose when and how to use them and in what instances.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So, do we see a world where, I guess maybe this is going too far down the rabbit hole, but you talk about interoperability, which I assume in my mind you're thinking of like APIs and other things connecting systems together. So, do we see a world where both site and patient are bringing their own data sources or data, I don't know the word I'm looking for here, but are able to sort of use their own systems which feed in to a bigger system? But again, do we see more players or more potential data sources that are all playing nicely together in the sandbox versus, a platform approach? In my own brain, I've like gone back and forth on like, which is better. I'm like, I'd rather have a platform and not have to worry about 17 different vendors that I'm, dealing with or whatever the case may be. And then of course, I love the idea of, some competition or being able to, the sort of age old problem of like, yeah, it does this good, but it does this really terribly. So we don't like it. What does that look like? Like, do you see sites bringing their own technology to the table and that being more readily accepted in a world where right now it's just, here's your 6 systems, good luck?
I do. I do think that the sites are going to start to control more of their destiny, that they're going to invest in systems themselves and become competent in a set of systems and be able to say, this is what we've created our standards around and can bring to the table in terms of our value from a systematic perspective. And then, frankly, can partner with the sponsor in a way that says, okay, you've adopted this, then we don't have to educate you. We don't have to certify you or validate you. You've done all of that. So we can plug into you and be able to leverage what you're working with. And I do think that that will be a use case that continues to grow. Just because, you know this, Brad, you know, if you're working with any number of sponsors, you're dealing with 7, 8, 10, name the number, end systems. And in some cases, if you're working with the same sponsor on a number of studies, those could be even multiples within that one portfolio of studies. That's a lot to manage. So I think that there's a real opportunity for some streamlining here. And, you know, one of the things that we see is the opportunity for us to work with the sites to be able to develop those standards and then work with the sponsors as well to create some of the benefit for both sides. So that I do see that as an emerging, you know, opportunity for both. And I think it's actually a good thing.
Yeah. Again, that's it's very interesting to see how that will sort of play out. I'm an optimistic person. I'm also tend to be sort of cynical or skeptical at times too. Like, is everybody going to play along? You know, is it a competitive advantage to play along and sort of open up the APIs, or or will we see companies continue to sort of insist on platforms? I mean, I would think it would become a competitive advantage to have that interoperability, and I keep hearing a real rising pitch on interoperability. I think it is starting to become more talked about.
Well, that's certainly one of our strategic focus areas. We do think that there's an opportunity for us to do what we do really well and partner with others to do what they do really well, but also create a level of common interfaces and capabilities that allow for ease of access and ease of use. So being able to have some single sign-on. I'll never forget. I had a conversation with a sponsor, and I someone I've known for a long time, and I was like, "What's the one thing we can do for you guys?" And there's like, just fix the single sign-on problem for our sites, so that when they engage with us, they don't have to sign into 5 different trials in 5 different user logins. Like, got it. And so, when I was at ERT, that was one of the things we worked on. And as we partner with our partners in this ecosystem, that's one of the things we're focused on. If we're going to work with an eCOA provider and provide our consent management product together, we're not going to have 2 logons. We're going to have 1. It doesn't make any sense otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling though how common it just still is. To have to hunt and peck and log into all these different systems. So again, even those seemingly small improvements can go a long way towards improving the experience for everybody. I mean, it's sad that the bar is sort of that low, I guess, so to speak. But on the other hand, there's a lot of room for improvement, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with one site network that is in one particular therapeutic area that's quite large. And, they've adopted our consent management capabilities, and they've standardized on it. And they probably run in this particular therapeutic area at least half the trials that run in the United States. And for them, it's created a real level of efficiency and common knowledge for them to operate. And, what we've done is we've built some really good rich data visualization and reporting that enables them to understand not only how the patients are participating in their consent process, but how they're adopting the technology internally and sort of doing their own self-checking of how it's working. And so, we want to build on that. We want to be able to build on how that adoption and how those options can be utilized by an organization as they move forward.
So in that case, then like a site or site network could use ClinOne as their e-consent vendor or provider across any and all trials. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, we may have to talk more offline about some of that because it's really interesting, because I feel like there's still kind of a limited options for sites in terms of driving it themselves. You know what I mean? And I think that's where, to your point, I mean, so much competitive advantage, efficiency can be created, and just better patient engagement because you don't have to bring somebody in to consent them. You may be able to save somebody an entire trip of a screen fail if you can consent them remotely through e-consent. And again, you're making people's lives easier. Even those that don't make it into your trial, you're making their lives easier.
Yeah, and aside from that, just the whole interventions around our data visualization and reporting platform allows you to look at your entire portfolio together. So you can see, are patients consenting through paper? Are they consenting through e? How long is the consent being reviewed? We know from when we deliver it to when they sign it. Do you have your reconsents done effectively? Are the versions managed effectively? So being able to provide that dashboard so that you can operate effectively, I think is really important. And it allows for self-management that I think maybe doesn't exist in a lot of places.
I don't think it would create some better even GCP proof in a way. If you're saying like, look, this person clearly reviewed this for whatever, an hour and a half. It wasn't a rushed, here, sign this piece of paper, get in and out. You're also potentially almost building in some SOP things that are done on yet separate pieces of paper as it stands, and instead, potentially capturing in a dashboard. So, I mean, I love that concept and something that I feel like we really haven't seen rolled out at scale at site levels yet. So, I don't know, very promising future in terms of, again, especially site leverage. I mean, look, again, I'm almost at a point now where I don't care where the tech comes from, as long as it's good and it makes sense and it works for everybody.
Sure.
That's it. It needs to work,
And that's consent is one use case. The other that I think about from a site perspective is, helping communications with the patient, being able to engage with them when they see something's not working effectively. For example, if, we're managing or monitoring their dosing adherence or the medication adherence, and they start to see things going awry, being able to engage and intervene with the patient effectively through whatever the method is. We happen to have secured encrypted messaging that you can send a text and say, hey, I see that you haven't necessarily taken your meds today. Is something up? Can we help you? Is there an opportunity for us to chat via video conference? Just there are worlds of opportunity to engage in ways that are flexible and will work.
Well, and again, you'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't. I know you've worked for some of these companies and seen a lot of things, but a lot of the ePro and devices out there really provide almost no insight to the site as to what's going on. They're filling out e-diaries and the data is going somewhere, and there may be some report sites can look at, but they're very difficult to find. It's not given to you in any meaningful way. You've got to sort of make it almost impossible for you to learn anything meaningful. You know what I mean? And again, that's a maybe seemingly not a big deal, but if you're trying to get a patient through a screening process and they need to do these things to get there and you can't even tell if it's being done properly, I mean, it's a huge, huge problem. And it's still persistent across a lot of the, leading ePro and eDiary companies. So it's just, again, you're selling me. So, get me going here.
All right. Well, I think, it's empowering the site and empowering the patient, as Jennifer said earlier, because ultimately, if they're invested in the process, particularly from a participant point of view, they're more likely to stay in the study. And so that's what we're all about. We want to help retain them.
Well, I think that, to Andrea's point, I think that what I think is forgotten a lot is the impact of the human connection that the site has with the patient. And, the ability to look at data and say, okay, this person, this patient has missed their dosing, right? And text them is powerful, but then to loop in the site and also let the site know what's happening and have the site be able to reach out to them and make that personal connection, that's a game changer. I think about, my mom and, she goes to the doctor and she knows the nurses and she just as a regular patient, and she calls them back, she's responsive. But but if we relied solely on technology for certain populations, we know that's not going to be as effective as this choice right? And this idea that we need to support, and empower the site coordinators who are the face of that technology a lot of the time, no matter who's created it behind the scenes.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with this, is that I think, again, it may be go unnoticed sometimes how much effort goes into a coordinator building these relationships and staying engaged with the participant. And the frustration is that as it stands, most technology is actually fighting against that rather than supporting and empowering it. You know what I mean? If I give somebody a Android phone from 2014, which is not even an exaggeration, that's something that is happening. It doesn't work. They got to call me at 11 o'clock at night and be like, what the heck? I can't fill this thing out. They can't make it through screening. Again, they're going to miss an opportunity to potentially improve their lives because they can't work with the technology that's there. So, I mean, for me, that's like the holy grail, right? Is technology that's actually supportive of the human relationship and not instead, degrading it in a lot of different ways, because, they get frustrated with us. It's not our fault. We get frustrated with the sponsor. It gets ugly, instead of, again, supporting that relationship. So I think we're all on the same page there, but you really took the words out of my mouth and probably said it a lot smarter than I did. So,
one of the other things, it's interesting you bring that up. One of the other things we did by design was we chose to utilize responsive web design technology versus apps. And the reason we chose to do that was because we wanted to really provide the easiest path for a patient and a site to engage. And so whatever they're comfortable with is what they can use. That's it. And then they can engage. And yeah, sure, if there's a provision device for whatever reason, if there's a need for that, by the way, we can sit on that too. It doesn't matter. But we did want to, it's all options. It's all about options. That's right.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I love it. I mean, it feels like you guys are very, very sort of tied in. You're very locked into where the problems are. I mean, that's encouraging. Again, I talk to a lot of people on the side who have these conversations and they have no clue. They just want throw tech at stuff, right? And I think it's very encouraging. And I applaud you guys for at least being thoughtful about that relationship. That again, I think sometimes people tend to just overlook. Again, it's refreshing in a lot of ways to see that. Of course, it's in some ways self-serving coming from somebody who runs, a network of sites, but conversational sites really aren't going anywhere yet, right? Contrary to popular belief, sites will continue to live on. There's way too many complex studies that can't be done with an app on a phone, and until that day, this is how trials are going to run. If you're okay, I want to switch gears just a little bit as we're getting long on time, but I know with all goes well, this will be dropping on September 22nd, which is American Business Women's Day. And, it's not lost on me. We have a CEO and a board member for, big tech company here. I mean, what does that mean for you guys? I mean, unfortunately, it seems like that's not super common, right? And this, especially in this sort of part of the industry. Is that fair?
Where do you want to start?
Okay.
I think it's very fair. I mean, I think it's very fair, certainly when, we each have had our own individual, experiences over a couple of decades, right? Coming up through this industry and, in all aspects, right? In your day-to-day executive job, also in your, interactions with boards and the investment community and capital raise. And so is truly one of the, outcomes that I am most proud of at ClinOne is having Andrea join us as CEO, someone who's been an accomplished technologist. And for me, it is just extremely rewarding to be able to see a woman who so deserved to be CEO have that opportunity. So, certainly her experience speaks for itself. But there are there's unique benefits and challenges just like anything else. But I really do appreciate the journey, that I've seen and obviously have been able to share for the last 6 months with Andrea. So,
and to add to the joy of it, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of boards in my career, and I have not had the opportunity to work with a woman board member in the past, more than the chairperson of my board. And so being able to partner with Jennifer for me is not only a unique experience, but I think an actual benefit to how we can operate and work together. I think that there's some perspectives that we have that add a level of, color and nuance and just different lens that I think brings, some real value to how we think about the business and how we run the business together. And I think it's very appreciated by the extended board, as well as the leadership team within ClinOne. It really, I mean, one of the things that also brought me was certainly Jennifer as a chairperson, but also the opportunity to work with a leadership team that is incredibly talented. And also, by the way, very balanced in our diversity in terms of, I have my head of finance is a woman, my head of HR is a woman. And, we have a really diverse team that has been a joy to partner with in my first 6 months as leading. And, lots more to come. But this is unique for me, and it's and I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to me that when you look at the demographics of clinical research coordinators, it's actually mostly female, right? And then I guess the higher you go, the more that starts to sort of flip, right? Which is kind of insane when you think about it. So I don't know, something that's not lost on me, right? I certainly it's a space probably dominated by your tech bros versus women. So again, it's very awesome what you guys are doing. I again applaud you in that.
Well, thank you. And again, it just allows for a diversity of perspective that I think just brings a richer, more valued opportunity for what we're delivering and to patients and to sites and to sponsors, really.
No, I agree. Guys, as we kind of wrap up here, any sort of thoughts as we exit?
Well, I guess, I'd love to just say thank you, Brad, for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad we went really deep in a lot of areas. And, we will continue to focus on the patient and the site and their journey and allow for that level of choice so that they can participate in the way that works best for them. So thank you for this opportunity and look forward to future.
Absolutely. Jennifer?
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure just getting to speak with you for a little bit. I'm, super excited to continue to learn, and we make mistakes, and we've made plenty of them. And I think shared learning and the ability, to question and to say, is this real? Or, why are we so quick to want to believe the next thing, right? Or the buzzword. And I think the ability to take a step back with people and engage in, sometimes uncomfortable discourse and sometimes pleasant discourse, I think is how we'll actually affect change. So we're not going to change, everything. I like to say we just like to leave every interaction better than we found it. And if we can continue to do that in each place, we'll end up in a net positive. So.
Oh, beautiful. I love it. Andrea, where can people find you online?
I am at Valenti at ClinOne.com.
And Jennifer?
jpeters@clinone.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure I like to post your guys' contact information on our show notes, just so people can reach out to you. We'll be planning to do a follow-up LinkedIn Live probably a week or so after this drops. You guys are up for it. So guys, everybody stay tuned for that. Andrea, Jennifer, thank you guys so much. Awesome conversation. We probably could have gone another, hour and a half if we really wanted to, but more to come. And thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Note to File podcast. Make sure to check us out online at notetofilepodcast.com for show notes, episode transcripts, and our guest contact information. Thanks so much for listening.